44-146.17 of the Code of Virginia. So Jerry, if you'd be kind enough to read the motion.
I move that the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District Board of Directors has determined that the nature of the declared COVID-19 virus emergency makes it impractical or unsafe for us to assemble in a single location for the purpose of transacting business statutorily required or necessary for us to continue operations and discharge our lawful purposes, duties, and responsibilities.
We have a motion. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Probably not. Hearing none. All in favor, just signify by saying aye. I think we can do it that way.
Aye.
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 Opposed? All right, motion carried. Thank you. Now today, one of the things we wanted to discuss was decorum at meetings. And I tried to share with you yesterday at least some of my thoughts on this. And we're not talking necessarily about a specific meeting, but I think I've heard from some people that we've had some instances at different meetings, committee meetings and other meetings come up in recent months that probably we need to just be aware of and understand, particularly the chairman's role in those things. And decorum at meetings involves not just the board of directors, of course, but virtually anybody that attends the meeting. And it involves the board, the associate members, the staff, the visitors, and so on. So I've asked if Adria would be kind enough to start off talking about that, if she's willing, because I know she has an interest in it.
Yeah, thanks, John.
What I'd like to do, Adria, if you don't mind, is so that we do keep some semblance of order here. If any of you want to talk about this topic, you know, we'll talk, I guess, as long as anybody wants to. But if you want to talk about the topic after you've had 5 or 6 minutes to talk, then we'll try to move to somebody else that may choose to talk. And once everybody that wants to say anything has said something, we can come back for those that would like a second turn or a third turn, whatever. All right. Thanks, Adria.
Thank you, John. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk for a few minutes. And I think it's, you know, online meetings are really hard. And I would say it is difficult sometimes as we sit in our boardroom to see body language as we're sitting in a linear row. If you recall from a year ago that we used to sit in a boardroom and we couldn't see each other's faces all the time. But while that is was hard, I think we could notice body language or even just posture of the person. And what I find is very difficult in online meetings, and it depends on the person's connection or online abilities or their computer or what have you. So I find that if there's a kind of a discussion and if someone wants to speak, maybe if I know that there are some different programs in Zoom and in this WebEx where you could raise your hand or use the chat box to communicate. I think that if we have a discussion going on and someone wants to say something but just cannot hold their thought, putting it in the chat box might be the best way, or utilize that because that person could be called on next. I'm just trying to figure out the best way to communicate in meetings, have them be the most productive meetings, and still remain professional as these meetings are public and are recorded. Does that all? You know, because not only are our board meetings like that, so are TRC meetings, and any other, I guess, committee meeting that that we would be doing as we go forward with these committees, like governance and personnel committees and the other committees that we've established last time. So that's kind of where I'm going, John.
Anybody else want to talk? Adria, one of the things that I'm hoping we can discuss today too is, as chairs of meetings, and we all chair some committees, we do have some not only responsibility but authority to just remind people, and maybe we should do it at the beginning of each meeting, that we expect the meeting to be conducted with some decorum. And that we'd like for people to ask the chairperson for the opportunity to speak, right, and don't interrupt people. It's awfully quiet. See, Monica.
I raised my hand.
Yeah, I got you.
The only thing for when these meetings are public and recognizing not everyone might have the ability to raise a hand, or they're not on Zoom, or even electronically. I know that, like, for example, in the tree commission, we provide a few minutes on the front end for anyone in the public to say what they want to say. And then there has to be an acknowledgement that the rest of the meeting is designated for the participants in the meeting. So that way, if it is public, we're ensuring that they have a voice, but at the same time, we give them an allotted amount of time to say what they need to say, and then that's it, because they may be calling in, their technology may be different. That way we get that out of the way, so to speak, not out of the way, but make sure that they're heard and then move on. And I just wanted to make that note, because when it's public, you could have anyone coming from, just a call in, and that makes it much more harder to not interrupt. So it's better to give them that moment. Just as we're creating outlines and a timeline or whatnot.
Anybody else?
I would.
Yes, Jerry.
I like Monica's suggestion. It has worked at the tree commissions. We haven't had. Sometimes we'll have one, maybe two people when the public will say they're there, and sometimes even have a statement. But I think it's a good formality to follow, to let the public know, these are public meetings and they're welcome. And also, having had their say, I think the understanding is that for the rest of the meeting, they're not going to be part of the meeting. They get to watch. They get to be there for sure. But it gives them an opportunity that they have to get off their chest. In several instances, I think it's been productive.
Jerry and Monica, I like that idea. A question though, if you give them the opportunity to speak first, and something comes up later that they really wanted to talk about but didn't know was going to be on the agenda, what do you do? Anything at all?
You save it for the very end. So if there's questions and people want to stay to the end, if there's time,
Okay.
I think there's been time where we provide it, and sometimes if it goes really late, you can say, if you have questions, we're happy to answer them. If you just provide us with the question, and we'll either address it afterwards in public, or we'll send the information back to you. Because I do think we have to be respectful of everyone's time, and with the public meeting, I think they give 2 to 3 minutes, like a 3-minute per person, depending on how, you don't want to give them 5 minutes, because then suddenly if you have 20 people, that's just a little too much. Not that we'll have 20 people, but I would kind of keep it at a 2 to 3 minutes. And then, I mean, they never use it, but, and then if there's questions from today's presenters or conversations, please make sure to write them down. I think all these things have to be kind of stated out loud. So in the sentence where we speak to decorum of the meeting, we can also speak to like that piece and just kind of wrap it into one little quick summary of meeting conduct. Or
That makes sense. Have a little bit of time, if there is time toward the end of the meeting, to address
questions.
us again.
Yeah, after you open it up to staff and directors, say, does the public have anything else to contribute?
Yeah.
I think it'd be fun. I do want to say, on the general principle of order, how do we keep order? I know I have profited, I expect you all have too, from the free flow of conversation that we normally have during a meeting. Very seldom have we had people's toes really get stepped on, or I can only think of one instance in all this time that I have been cut off and didn't think it was appropriate. So I think as a general matter, Robert's Rules of Order says, you have a stated period of time, 5 or 10 minutes, and then be quiet while the next person talks. But that tends to cut off the kind of discussion that happens when, as John has, I think, very properly done, let the conversation be pretty free flowing. So until we have a situation where it is contentious and people might be stepping on each other's toes, I think that if we have something like that, I think John's perfectly astute to recognize that and say, okay, we're going to impose 5-minute limits. But as a general rule, I think the conversation we have is very productive and not at all rude in 99% of the time. So I hesitate to say, let's go with strict Robert's Rules of Order, or even if we have the informal order for, groups of less than 12 people on a board, I wouldn't want to cut off that flow of conversation.
Jerry, I don't disagree with that at all. And I tried to mention in my little comment yesterday, in the 15, 16 years now that I've been on the board, I can't recall more than a couple times when we've even had something we were concerned about. And I think it deals a lot with the people we deal with and the character of the people we deal with. But we've had some instances, and I think a couple of you have reminded me that we've had some recently. So probably the topic is at least a good one to discuss.
I agree.
And I think as chairs of different meetings, committee chairs or what, seminar chairs, workshop chairs, whatever, there are some techniques we can use, and maybe just to remind people that we expect proper deportment at the meeting, and let it go at that. The thing you worry about when you even say that, though, is that people will think, "Whoa, what's going on? What's happening?" And I think, yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry, this is Laura. I just wanted to acknowledge that Chris's hand is up. He's used the hand icon.
I can't see it.
I think we just need to, we'll have to train our eyes a little bit for seeing
Is it on the chat? So I'll open it up so I can see. But I'm sorry, Chris, I didn't see that. Thank you, Laura.
I just tried it to see how it worked because I've never used it before. And boy, it's not very, obvious that it's up there. You have a tiny little hand.
Where is it, Chris?
Up in the top corner of my little block.
Yeah, where do you?
Oh, now if I mouse over it, it makes the hand, opportunity to lower the hand.
How do you trigger it? Just go over that corner?
Well, you got to go into the smiley face for reactions, and then there's a raise hand, lower hand thing.
Oh.
Yeah.
So it's oh,
okay, I got it.
So now you're laughing at us all.
Cool. I didn't know it was there.
Well, Chris, and that's
noticeable.
That's what
having a smiley. Oh, now Adrian's yelling or celebrating. I agree with everybody. We had a couple discussions on the Chesapeake Bay ERC that everybody was talking over each other, and at one time I actually hit the gavel pretty good, and we had a talk about how to go around, and we decided to take our name tags, which are about 14 to 15 inches long, and turn them up vertically so they stood up, and then we went around. And when the public spoke, they had an opportunity. They're actually supposed to sign up to speak, but in some cases they would speak for I think it was 3 minutes, and one of the board members later would have a comment for them, and we would recognize them. And specifically, if a board person asked them a question, they would be recognized to participate in the discussion, the time frame that it was going on, and it worked pretty well. I think here we've done pretty well at just recognizing when somebody else is speaking. I think there was, been some instances where people call in, and I think that happened recently. And I know some of you have probably been on phone calls, and the way it works is you don't get to talk. Even if you're having a back and forth conversation, the other person can't hear you because of the way the system is shut off. And I've had many times where I've been frustrated just trying to have a conversation where you can't break into the way that signal is broken up. And by the time you do, it's sort of loud sometimes. But most of us are online. I almost called in today because it wasn't coming back online. But that's all.
That's a good example, though, of what Adria talked about Zoom and WebEx meetings. I didn't even see Chris's hand. And I guess I've got to keep that participant block open all the time and keep watching for things like that.
Should we use this?
Yeah, something more obvious.
Da-da-da.
I guess there are all those things we can use, aren't there? But
Now
training
just-
people to use them is something else.
Yeah, I spent 20 seconds trying to find the raised hand. I didn't know where it was.
Adria.
Well, and Jerry with his clapping.
Oh, boy.
Where are you guys finding all that stuff?
Down at the bottom of the screen.
There, I got it.
Down at the bottom.
Smiley
I see it.
face.
There's a little smiley face
I-
plus. That's
I see
probably
it.
more obvious than the raised hand, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
But the raised hand is in there.
It's going to be harder to maybe train people for that, though, depending upon their device.
Well, we might have to untrain them. It's like, if everyone's doing hand signals, then John's going to say, okay, enough hand signals.
So
It's too distracting.
Monica?
I think this brings the question of going back to a meeting where there's participants that have been invited. Are we laying out the new rules of how do you see, like, what do you see as the consequences if they're not followed? Are we establishing an outline for people to follow when they attend these meetings now? And I'm saying I agree with you, Jerry, with the free flow, but in instances where something bubbles up and there's what is the next step for the chairman of that committee to do or say?
Anybody besides me want to take a crack at that?
Well, John, you've done a good job. If just the way, and with Laura, the way the agenda's set up, everybody's got a turn for the outside participants to speak, and you ask, for other board members or for other participants. And frankly, nobody else comes. And if there's somebody new, it's usually known ahead of time what they're talking about. I think it also relates to my feeling of some of the participants that have, from our partner groups have talked. They've gone on for a while without really saying anything sometimes. And it gets a little, all right, wrap it up.
And that's where the chair's tact and judgment has to come in. And I think all of you have that. Monica, I'm not sure we're trying to come up with new rules or new guidance necessarily. I think we're just asking people to conduct themselves properly the way they know to do at meetings. And we've had so few instances, at least in my knowledge, where we've had somebody that didn't respect those rules that we might have wanted to call them on it. But it's just a good topic for us to discuss because we're all going to serve as chairs at some point, and you may be called upon to remind somebody that we'd like them to conduct themselves more properly. And I think once challenged like that, most people would.
Laura's tooting her horn.
I see that.
I was tooting my horn here a little bit. It may also help out if, and I don't know, John, how your layout is, but I can see all of you all on my screen. And that's really helpful because then I could see that Chris's hand was up and I could see that, that the thing is flying. So if you have the layout where it may be focused or staged, you may only be seeing the person who is speaking or the last person who spoke. I do want to just mention, I'll give you an example. At the Green Breakfast, we have a little introductory slide that kind of gives a bit of guidance in terms of how that day is going to go. Please make sure you're on mute. Please understand that the meeting is being recorded. So if your video is on, you may be recorded. We did have incidences where we had to blur out certain things and stuff like that. But just having those expectations up front, I think helps on the back end with understanding from a participant side what the expectations are and how to behave, because I don't think anybody rationally wants to speak out of turn or interrupt or create chaos in a meeting. But those kinds of things accidentally happen because they may not understand necessarily how folks want the conversation to go. And the way that it might have worked, I think Adria made a good point. The way it may have worked when we were in person and where we could see each other, or at least, out of the corner of your eye, see somebody's hand raised or something like that. It's just not as that communication style doesn't lend itself totally well, especially because we have some folks that may be on camera and some folks because of bandwidth issues and whatnot, may be off camera. And so some of those, again, nonverbal cues we may not see. So it just helps to have some of those things laid out ahead of time, and then people know, participants know what's expected.
The other thing I mentioned yesterday that at least I think about, and we're talking about decorum, but we as both elected and appointed members of this board have a little more responsibility than probably just the average citizen in our own community too. We represent the district at other meetings. And I think it's important for us to remember that we do that because our conduct is scrutinized and observed. So that's just something that comes up, whether we like it or not. We go to the Potomac Watershed Roundtable, we go to a lot of other meetings, and there's a lot of places you might go where you're not really representing the district, but people know you're a board member of the district and may think you are. So it's just a good caution to think about. Anything else on decorum? Monica, I cannot hear you.
I think to your point, John, too, as we move forward, I mean, I know I set up a soil and water conservation website for myself. And to your point, the public facing portion of yourself should always kind of be mindful that that's what you're representing. So like my private Facebook is very private and I have just my friends. And then my public one that I allow anybody in, not that I have a massive following, but is set so that, just something to think about too as we move forward in this digital age and people having these spaces is just making sure that, the reminder that what's yours is personal, and then your you have a public facing that kind of respects the office if you're going down that road. And that's not necessarily applicable to here, but in the future, there may be more people that choose to go down and be more social media, it's just something else to include and think about.
It is. We're not delegates or senators or federal officials, but we don't have quite the personal space that we used to have as just plain citizens, I don't think, as elected and appointed directors. But it's just something to think about. Mm-hmm. Anybody else? Anything on? Yes. What's Chris's? What's he doing?
I'm saying, getting ready to cheerlead. Although that distracted me for a second. Well, in following up with Monica, it's amazing that what power some of the citizen people think a director of the Soil and Water Board has, and it's almost laughable. We're not much more than ordinary citizens with an affiliate with a group that's trying to do well. We don't have regulatory authority or special ins with anybody to get them to do anything.
But we're paid so well, Chris.
Oh, yeah, I know. I've had people laugh at that too.
Well, I've appreciated this discussion because I think it's always wise for us to consider these things. We are public personalities in some regards. We might even think about crafting something that's very tactful and maybe a little bit blasé, but crafting a statement that chairman can make at the start of a meeting, could make if they chose to, that just remind people that it's good for them to conduct themselves. It's good for the meeting to be conducted where people are reporting themselves properly. I don't sense that too many meetings I've been at, we've had instances of people not doing that, but it just heads it off if they could.
Yeah, I think, when we have a full board meeting and we tend to have staff as well as some public and awardees or whatnot, that I don't know whether it's possible to jigger the format so that what you're seeing on your screen are just the board, and non-board members are off to the side somehow. In terms of seeing if somebody's got a hand raised, for instance, we can that it's difficult just with 6 of us on, but with 20, that's going to be hard to do. Is there some way that I don't know enough about the formats for these online things to know, can we do that?
Adria? Adria?
What I try to say, Jerry, is if there's something that is burning that you can't wait to share, then instead of, I guess, the interruption, then we should ask someone to put it into the chat box and type it into the chat box, like, maybe, Mr. Chairman, I have something to add or something like that, instead of just kind of unmuting the mic and jumping in. On some of my programs where I've had, you try to imagine keeping decorum or at least control over almost 186 people. When I have had classes like that, just like the green breakfast, you have to keep everybody muted, and there's buttons where we could mute everybody. And that's something where Laura may have control of that, or John may have control of that as the host or co-host. And may be able to keep everybody muted, but that's not something that like if everybody has control of their own microphone and they're just kind of jumping in, it would be as if somebody was jumping up at a board meeting or a committee meeting and just spouting out whatever they wanted to say. You know what I mean?
I
So
agree. That's a matter of being polite, and
Mhm.
95% of the time, I think everybody here is, and the public is too. I'm thinking more about John's job of recognizing the next speaker,
Yep.
and how is he going to do that? Normally, if the conversation is like we're having now, it goes relatively slow. I'm perfectly willing to wait for anybody else to quit speaking. But if there's a lot going on and there in fact is an issue that we get seriously involved in, and we want to cut each other off to make a point, that's when John needs to be able to have better control. In order to know that somebody out there really wants to speak next, he needs to be able to see our screens. If we're going to do it by using because the chat, I don't know how you can be the chair of a meeting and also follow the chat box. The visual signals on the screen, the remarks or the smiley face and whatnot can be seen. But like the point I was making was if there's 20 people on, the chairman wouldn't be able to see if a board member's got a hand up. So that leads to my question about, is there a way to format the screen so that John only has to see, can see just the board and not everybody?
Laura?
So I don't think that there's that option to be able to limit who you see on your particular screen. You can you can hide participants with their video off and that sort of thing, but I think it's a little bit more difficult to arrange it, I think, the way that you want. I think that this is a bit of a larger conversation in terms of how do you facilitate these meetings in the digital age, right, in the virtual setting. And when I have my screen up, when I'm having to facilitate these meetings, I have both the participants list and the chat up. And so those are up and visible on my right side. So I can still pay attention to the conversation, but I'm also just checking in, seeing, okay, Adria had something that she wanted to say. I need to make sure that when there is the right space, I can give her that opportunity to talk or expand on that kind of thing. So it goes back to a little bit of meeting facilitation and just, managing that pace. And, it is definitely quite a bit of multitasking as well. Adria used the example of the master gardeners, and we had the same kind of thing with the Potomac Watershed Roundtable, where we had about 45 participants in that. And prior to that meeting, I met with the chair and said, well, how can I help you? How can I help to moderate? I can respond to chat, questions as they're coming in, or I can flag it in just regards to, oh, that's a good question. We'll make sure that we ask it, so that that's a visual cue for the chair as well, to just make sure that question gets answered. As it turns out, it started off that way, and then by the end, I just sat back because Penny got into her rhythm. So there definitely is, different comfort levels and with this kind of format. And we can definitely, you all can lean on me. I take minutes at this meeting, but in the board meeting, Heather is the one who's capturing a lot of those notes. I'm capturing some other notes as well. But I can support in terms of helping to facilitate, the dialogue. Or just like I did just a few minutes ago, oh, I see that somebody has their hand raised, and it's not meant to embarrass anybody, but if the more eyes you have, the more we can self-regulate and self-facilitate, the better it is going to be for all of us, certainly. So I think the idea of, again, John, I think you had suggested crafting a statement or coming up with just some general guidelines, at the beginning of the meeting. This is how folks can participate. We want their participation, and I think it is very helpful, again, in just sort of setting those expectations, from the get-go.
And it shouldn't be threatening. Jerry, did you have your hand up?
No, I was waving goodbye to my wife. She's off to the vet.
Oh, okay. Does anybody else have, Adria?
I think, I agree with Laura about, just kind of paying attention and everything. I think this kind of meeting facilitation is all new to us, and we're still kind of getting that. And I think also some of our participants are still getting used to the best way to actually participate and have their voice heard. I think setting some ground rules. Utilizing the chat box, I think, is going to be our best that we can do, as far as, trying to maybe even hold our thoughts for a few things, like, oh, I have something to say about that. And then we'll just try to, help each other out as much as possible, especially if each other are chairing meetings. I found that it's hard for me if I'm presenting or facilitating to pay attention to the chat box. So I could see how it would be very difficult, especially with John being used to facilitating meetings in person all of his life. So I want to kind of just say that I think we have to pay attention to that and give each other a heads up. All of us have been challenged by this way of doing meetings, but I don't think it's going away. And I think that we might find ourselves doing meetings like this, at least partially, in a hybrid form, because of the way people are going to find that this is a better way for them to connect. So we might find ourselves actually continuing on with this beyond the COVID experience, if you all know what I mean. But
Yeah,
I really appreciate the discussion.
we might find after we check our gasoline bills for the year that it really makes a lot of sense not to be driving across the county, twice every month.
It'll be interesting to see how the state deals with that after, because we are a public body, after the COVID threat has passed. Will they still allow for some meetings to be conducted this way?
Good point.
Monica, can't hear you.
Unmute.
That mute button just is my bane of my existence. I mean, I don't know what the state will do, but personally, from a equity perspective and an inclusivity perspective, I think that there needs to be movement on the state to ensure that, I look around at who can attend meetings and when meetings are and all of that. It makes it very difficult for the inclusivity of a full, holistic, rounded group of voices that are diverse and representative of a community when you can only have it at certain times in person in certain places. And if we're being honest and fair and we really want to implement DEI in the way, whether it's one Fairfax, but even bigger than that, I don't see how we can't progress as a society and be inclusive of voices and represent our communities well if we don't think of hybrid situations which enable more people to join. But that's just my soliloquy on it. I just think I love in person. I plan on attending in person as often as I can, but I think from a perspective of, just thinking outside the box and being more inclusive, they have to figure out a way to open it up so that more people can participate. But that's just my dream.
Monica, this is getting us away from deportment just a bit, but my experience with conservation districts going back 60 years is that we're probably one of the 10% or fewer districts that meets during the day. And the rest of them meet in the evening only because that's about the only time a lot of other people could attend the meeting.
Yeah. That makes sense.
But this is historic for this district, and for a lot of reasons, it's been this way long before I came on the board, probably long before Adria came on it. And it's not going to change, I don't think. But we don't get too many citizens that just choose to attend our board meetings.
No, right. And again, I am not advocating for changing anything. It's just a note that even in all the other commissions and committees, no matter what, it's just always difficult if you have to drive. Before the tree commission would have been at the county, right? And you have to drive all the way. And I just think of people who take public transportation, they can't become a commissioner if that's the only way they can get there. And it just makes no sense, even if you hold it in the evenings. It's just a more of a note of how we have to think differently in order to really fully represent all the voices in our community. So this has been a good thing, I think, in some ways, not in all ways, but I think it's opening up people's minds to say, oh, we can do this.
I think it would be a total win if we had enough people from the public who wanted to come to our meetings that we had to have it, say, on a Saturday morning. That would be, man, we've done our job now.
Would be, Jerry. By the way, getting back to one of Jerry's other comments, my WebEx, for example, when we have our full board meeting, mine shows every participant up on the top, little boxes with their pictures, and I have to kind of scroll over to see all the people because it only shows about 6 at a time.
Yeah.
And I don't think
because we're looking at a piece of paper.
Yeah, I don't think that can change, Laura, at all. Yes, Laura.
So I just wanted to say, if somebody is presenting, is that what you meant, John? If somebody is presenting information, then you just see.
If they're presenting, sometimes their screen pops up.
Yes.
But if I'm chairing the meeting, I see all of these pictures up on the top of my screen. And I can only see about 6 at a time, so I have to keep scrolling over to see who else is on the call. I could put the participant list up and it would show everybody.
That would help. You may want to, I think the way that you've got your layout, let me actually orient you here for a moment. And I can actually also do this offline if anybody else wants to do this. But if you're looking at your screen, you should see up in the upper right-hand corner, it should say layout. You may have to move your cursor around a little bit, but you should see a little button that says layout.
It's under the chat box.
Yeah. I'm learning all kinds of things today.
So this one, I've got one now that's called grid, and mostly I see Laura, you're occupying the whole screen, and everything else is in little thumbnails down at the bottom.
I think the way that you've got yours set up right now is called stage. And that would be the person who is last spoke. So for my camera, you were the last person who spoke. So you are the main stage. But if you go to grid, then you should see 6 little boxes with everybody's face on it. Right. And then when this comes up during the board meeting, you'll see at least 9 faces. And possibly up to 12 on one page. And then the focus, again, is you won't see anybody else except for your own little box in the right-hand corner. and that and the last person who spoke for you.
Oh, okay.
So
Well, for some reason, I think I took myself off
we
trying
can,
to follow your instructions.
You're still there, but not for yourself, I guess.
Can you see me?
yes.
Well, I can't see anybody else now at all.
You're occupying my whole screen. I'm on stage.
You're on stage. So I would be more than happy if any of you want a little bit more of a work session as you're chairing meetings and things like that, and you would like to see some of the different features. So right now, John is under the Northern Virginia Soil and Water. So you'll see he set his little box, his little name tag says co-host. I'm the host, which just gives me a lot more privilege to be able to, make modifications. The recording is going to be saved to my computer, for example. All of these different kinds of things. I can set it up so that anybody new who comes in is automatically muted. So there's a wide variety of different things that we can certainly do that just help. But I would definitely encourage getting familiar with the use of the participants and the use of the